This happened on a hike up to Half Dome. We had a campground about a 20-minute drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of me, an 18-year-old male, my uncle, a 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend, I'll call him D. There were 2 girls with us, but they aren't relevant to the story. My uncle and his friend are both Christians, so there were no substances consumed that could induce the feelings I will be talking about. We get to our campsite, set up camp, and go to sleep after eating. We plan to wake up at 4 and start to hike by 4:30. I randomly wake up at 3:30 a.m., like completely wide awake, and look out of my hammock, and I remember this odd feeling as if I was woken up by something. I remember looking out at the moonlit scene. The moon was very bright for some reason, and thinking to myself that it looks like a dream. I lay back in the hammock, but can't go to sleep, and end up waking up my uncle and friend at 3:50. My uncle asks me, "Were you walking around at night?" This is important, and I say no, and ask why. He says that he woke up for some reason and could hear someone walking around, not like an animal, but a person. I say, weird, and we brush it off. We get to the trailhead around 4:30, and as everyone is unloading from the car, Dee says that he's going to use the bathroom, which there are a couple of before the trailhead. I walk behind him for some time before falling behind and waiting for my uncle, who forgot something in the car. The short, straight road from the parking lot runs directly into a T intersection with the road to the trailhead, and the bathroom is directly across from the intersection through a field a little. Those who have been there know what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for Dee to come out of the bathroom. We wait about 10 minutes before I go and check, and he isn't there. I get back to my uncle and tell him that. He says, "Weird, maybe he went back to the car or something," and we decide to wait a bit more. By 5:10, we begin worrying. My uncle goes to check the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure that we don't miss him if he went down the road away from the trailhead. My uncle returns and says he isn't there either. We decide maybe he went up the trailhead without us for some reason, and walk up in there for about 10 minutes. He isn't there either. We're kind of baffled now because there are no other logical places he would go. I decide to run back and check the car and the bathroom again. I meet him halfway before I get to the intersection. He is sweaty and disheveled with a weird look in his eyes. I say, "Where have you been?" He says that he went to the bathroom, and when he got back to the intersection that we weren't there, and that he just assumed that we went to the trailhead and started walking, and then met me. I say, "What do you mean? We waited at the intersection for over half an hour and checked at the car, bathroom, and trailhead, and you weren't there." He says, "Well, I don't know. I went to the bathroom." He then asks me where my uncle is. I say at the trailhead, and he asks me again. I tell him again, and note that it was weird that he was asking me twice. As we were crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees a light off the riverbank and exclaims, "Oh, maybe that's him," and I just look at him and keep walking. I thought his behavior was very strange, like he wasn't thinking straight. We finally get on with the hike, and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight, one of the girls' gloves, a water bottle, etc. It's like we simply just forgot about the items and couldn't remember where we possibly could have left them. On the way back it got dark, and we turned on our flashlights, and as we near the end of the hike after the 2 waterfalls, it begins to seem as if we've been walking for too long. My uncle also confirms this, asking me, "Doesn't it seem like it's taken way longer to get back?" I say, "Yeah, that I was just thinking that." We keep walking, but it still seems like we weren't making any progress. I've been on that trail many times, and as I was walking, I couldn't spot any of the familiar landmarks. It was weird. There was this odd feeling in the air, sort of a slight menacing sensation. It's hard to describe. I remember thinking, it feels like the woods are alive. We remark 3 more times about how long the hike is taking and start to laugh at it because it felt so ridiculous. After a bit we finally and suddenly find ourselves on the final stretch and make it back to the car. Now all of this seemed odd at the time, but I just brushed it off. I only just realized how weird those events felt after we got home and my aunt asks my uncle, "Were you camping?" And he says, "Yeah, how did you know?" As we didn't tell them we were going since it was kind of last minute. She said that she had an odd dream where she saw my uncle in a tent in a forest somewhere, and there was someone outside of his tent. She said that she couldn't see who it was, but knew that there was a presence there. She says that she woke up around 3 and had the strongest urge to pray for him, and she did. My uncle kind of looks at me after hearing that like, "Are you serious?" I honestly don't know what to make of all of this. I was with my niece, who's on her high school soccer team and is taking it pretty serious and attempting to get some kind of scholarship out of it. I'm pretty healthy, but don't really work out too much. Something I often do is run and hike. I live in Kentucky, not in a rural part, but there is a state park near my house that's about 6,500 acres, so it's pretty secluded and densely forested. There are some really nice trails that allow you to run for a good chunk and then hike for a bit to split up the long bits of the trail that are flat. She decided to tag along with me today for a quick 3 or 4 mile run. It was raining, but nothing too heavy, kind of a spitting rain. Nothing we couldn't handle. We got up to the peak of this one hill, and it had been about 2 miles or so according to our phones, so we decided to turn back and head back to the car. As we were headed down the steep side of the climb, we were walking pretty slow, making sure that we didn't lose our footing, when out of nowhere there was the coldest chill that came up from behind us once we made it about halfway down. At the time it happened, we both commented on how cold it was on our backs, but didn't make too much out of it and went on with our conversation. In these woods there's some wildlife like small deer and I believe maybe some coyotes, but they tend to stay away from the paths. At least I've only ever heard them in my many years of coming here, never once seen any more than a few footprints. Once we got off of the hillside and hit a stretch of trail that was flatter ground, we began to pick up the pace when a deer darted across the path maybe 10 yards max in front of us, causing us to stop in our tracks. The first deer was then followed by 3 more, and not one of them even so much as looked our way. My niece looked at me puzzled because of the oddity of it. And to me, they were acting as if they were running from something, a predator of some sort. Once they had gone, we started back with our run, and we heard a noise behind us. A loud booming sound of something of substance falling to the ground from some height. When we stopped and turned, we saw nothing. No animal scurrying away like one would expect after a substantial noise in the wilderness. In fact, everything was calm, eerily calm. Just as we looked at each other to ask what the hell that had been, there was yet another cold wind gush through the valley, pushing all the rain off the leaves surrounding us and soaking our sweatshirts. I was starting to freak out inside, but was doing my best to stay calm for my 17-year-old niece. I'm pretty sure she could tell, though, that I was freaked out. I tell her, "Come on, let's get to the car." And we take off again, and there was a man leaned up against a tree on the side of the trail, dressed in a black suit with a white button-up shirt on. His collar was opened, but he had a tie on, sagging like a tired businessman on the way home from a long day. It startled me at first. I was not expecting to see anyone for a few reasons, one being that we were at least a mile away from any parking lot or street, another being that we had never heard or seen him coming, and the stretch of trail that we were on was flat and open for a good half-mile. I got over to put myself between the man and my niece as we jogged past him. When we did, I looked him in the eye and gave him a "how you doing" nod as we went along. He was sort of pale. His eyes were very white, but his irises were ice blue. Everything I saw from the quick look that I got close up looked to be clean-cut and proper. I did not notice a speck of mud on him anywhere, and the two of us had it caked on the bottom of our shoes and even on the back of our pants and shirts from kicking it up on us as we ran. We had to get to the top of another hill, smaller than the last, but still quite the hike. Once at the top, I took a quick look behind us, and he had seemed to vanish without a trace. Now, with having the vantage point of the hill, I could see out past the trail and see most of the trail that she and I had just come from, yet he was nowhere in sight. I scanned the sides of the trail, and still nothing. My niece asked me who that guy was and why he was out so deep in the woods wearing a suit. Questions I simply did not have the answers to. We made it back to the car with nothing else out of the ordinary happening to us on the trail. As we got to my car, I pulled the keys from my pocket and unlocked the doors from maybe about 10 feet out. Walking up to the only car in the entire lot, I noticed muddy footprints coming away from my car from the driver's side. Weird, considering I had no mud on my shoes when we got there. But there are trails leading up to the lot, so I figured maybe someone had came through before we got there and I just didn't notice. However, when I pulled the handle to open the door, it was also caked with mud underneath, as if someone had been attempting to open my door with a muddy hand. Nothing more occurred, but the whole encounter leaves chills covering my body the more I think about it. I'd like to start this off by saying that I'm an absolute skeptic, to the point where I've always secretly scoffed about paranormal activities. But I can't explain this. I met my husband in a little dive bar that he was managing. We clicked instantly, and he's a very outdoorsy guy. We got together a couple times, then he officially asked me out on an overnight hike. I had a 10-month-old St. Bernard pup, who of course came with. We drove up way past Cougar towards Mount St. Helens and parked on the trailhead leading to Bolt Camp. It's just a little shelter along the Lewis River about 5 to 6 miles in. We packed all our gear, and even a backpack for my dog, and headed out. I can't stress how beautiful that hike is. Massive Douglas firs covered with moss. Sometimes there were little wooden bridges crossing streams along the trail. My husband would always yell, "Watch out for trolls," when we crossed them. We got kind of a late start, so the sun went down and it was almost completely dark by the time that we arrived. There were so many hollow stumps the setting sun would shine through them, and they lit up inside. They looked like little hobbit houses with fires burning in their hearths. And the mushrooms, my God, there were bioluminescent ones that glowed green in the dark. It took forever. He kept saying that it was around the next bend, but it never was. We finally arrived and unpacked, and it was awesome. You can look up Bolt Camp online. It's a wooden 3-sided shelter. You'll even see my saint in one of those pics. A tree had come down on it at some point, and the pics you see of it partially smashed are how it was for us. It was still more than intact enough to sleep in, though. People leave stuff at Bolt Camp for the next folks. Someone had left half a bottle of scotch. We partook in that, and when we left, we hung a little baggie of weed from the rafters, and some beer and water. Anyway, we made a fire and cooked steaks on rocks, got drunk, and fell in love. I fell asleep first. I slept towards the inside of the shelter, my now husband and dog toward the outside. It was late October, and while it was dry, it was very, very cold, and the fire refused to stay lit. Eventually, he fell asleep too. My Saint Leo kept growling into the dark, and they bonded over that. "What do you see, buddy? "What's out there?" They were both asleep when I woke up. Thinking it was around 2:30 to 3 a.m., I was facing the back wall of the shelter. Then I saw it. A wispy, gossamer, cobweb-looking thing floating to and fro in the back of the shelter. It would flip and spin and turn over itself. It was so beautiful and fascinating. I wasn't scared. I really wanted to wake him up, but I barely knew the dude and was afraid he would think I was nuts. So I watched it until I fell asleep. Morning came. I never mentioned it. We fed the dog, ate a bunch of trail mix and cheese and sausage, and hiked back. I dropped him off at his place. Like I said, we fell in love that night, and moved in together a couple months later. We were reminiscing about our awesome hike when he decided to share something with me. I dropped him off that day at his house. That same evening, he was out on his porch having a smoke when he saw something. A cobwebby thing, turning over and over on itself, floating back and forth in the street lamps. He found this interesting. He watched it, and finally it settled into a clump of bushes. He went to take a closer look, and a pair of glowing red eyes materialized, and he decided that he wanted no part, and ran back indoors. This is a man afraid of nothing. Anyway, I obviously immediately told him about what I had seen, and how I was too embarrassed to share before. The similarities are just too great. It had to have been the same thing. So the area is deep in the Monongahela Forest in Virginia. I was doing some hiking there alone, trying to explore the new area, seeing what's out there. Everything was going pretty smooth in general, except for one occurrence that had gotten me blown away completely. By the way, I'm a 37-year-old male, been hiking in forests and mountains many times, never had an issue. Anyway, so I'm walking in the forest. It was around 4 p.m. I was alone. I had everything on me, including a radio beacon, compass, GPS on my phone, and smartwatch. So as you can see, taking my precautions in case I get lost, so that I can figure out my whereabouts and get back. I also even had printed maps on me. While walking, I all of a sudden felt some sort of weird, very weird quietness. As if you know it was the vacuum. No birds chirping, just quietness. And what's extra weird about it was that it was so quiet that I could hear the humming in my ears that you sometimes get to hear in total silence. I'm thinking, okay, quite odd. First though is that there might have been a predator in the vicinity, so I was trying to keep an eye out for that. I did carry something to protect myself with just in case I got attacked. Anyway, I just keep walking. No predator, but the quietness was just there. It's strange. I did not even see any birds anymore, just trees. I also noticed that the weather started getting worse, it became cloudy in an odd way. I don't know how to explain it. Long story short, the weather got bad pretty much out of nowhere. At this point, I kind of started feeling I don't know how to describe it, I guess uneasiness. I decided to go back, and here's this. All of a sudden, the GPS is out on both my phone and my smartwatch, and the compass is spinning as if there's a magnet close by or something like that. That got me very concerned because it pretty much means that I can't find out where to go in case I get lost. I started walking back. None of my navigational tools are working. I'm kind of still going back, just kind of orienting myself by the way that I came in. All of a sudden, I see the clouds above are really bizarre. It's like most of the clouds are weird and grayish in color, but they're not like clouds, but more kind of like fog, which is really way up. Then there was another cloud kind of surrounded by gray clouds, which was black. I've never seen a cloud look like that before. It was almost like the night sky. Then the craziness happened. All of a sudden, I hear music. Like a town clock bell or something like that, doing it every 10 seconds or so. I don't know, at the time I just got scared, really freaked out, and I just started running very, very fast back where I had come from. I was sprinting, and then eventually I noticed that the weather got better. It was no longer cloudy. The clouds weren't in fact visible anywhere near. I looked at my compass and GPS, and it was back up. I was, in fact, headed in the correct direction. After that, I just went back to the place where I had parked and left. Later that day, I looked up the weather forecast for that area. There wasn't supposed to be any cloudiness anywhere. It was supposed to be a sunny day with only sporadic clouds. I told my story to my buddies, also hikers. They say it might have been that I could have maybe fallen and maybe had a dream of that, but I don't think so because I don't remember falling or having a dream. Anyways, it's kind of a weird story. Maybe there's a logical explanation, but I don't know. I grew up in rural Oregon with around 70 acres of wooded private property as my personal playground. By the time I was 16, I had spent countless hours exploring every square foot that I could and had never experienced anything any more unpleasant than poison oak and more than a few blackberry scratches. Oddly, there was one small portion of the property that I had never checked out. I couldn't tell you why I had never gone to this one little corner. I just never did. It was like an unconscious choice to just never go there. There was even an old trail or road leading back to it. One afternoon, I got the itch to turn left and follow that trail. The day was bright and warm. Nothing was sketchy or untoward. However, within 50 feet of the trailhead, I felt an overwhelming need to stop in my tracks. It was like stepping on a giant, sticky mouse trap. My feet simply wouldn't carry me any further forward. As I stood there, every hair on my body stood on end, and I felt absolutely sick to my stomach with dread. I spun in place, looking every direction for whatever danger my body was telling me was there. The spot where I stood was a bit of a clearing in the trees. I had about 20 feet or so of total visibility in all directions, and further in some. There was nothing, not so much as a bird or a bug. I've never felt such utter terror and the desire to go full knees to chest for the hills. I made my way back to the trailhead as fast as I could backpedal, and the second my feet left the trail, it all faded. Hairs back down, stomach settled, and zero sense of unease. It was like stepping out of a room and closing the door. For years I wondered what kind of presence I had encountered. Many naysayers tried to tell me that it was probably just a cougar and it was my sixth sense picking up on it. I wasn't buying it. Then, in talking to my parents one day, who used to wander that property when they were dating a few decades ago, I found out that they had come across the remnants of an old homestead there. It had deteriorated to the point where there was nothing left but the outline of the foundation and some old medicine bottles. I had a light bulb moment. Seems that maybe one of the homesteaders was still there, and I was definitely trespassing. I've had short-lived moments of temptation where I thought about going back there and seeing if I could replicate the experience. In all honesty, though, whatever was there was way too dark for me to ever want to encounter it again. It definitely seems best left alone. My grandpa was always a big hunter. It's not uncommon here in the Midwest. He would always find new areas to hunt and get permission to hunt on private properties. So one day, him and his buddy got permission to go on this private land that I believe was around 100 acres total. I don't recall the specifics of exactly where the forest was. For now, I know for a fact that this was in the Michigan-Indiana border area, or in other words, Michiana. Anyways, they set out around noon to get to the forest and arrived at around 1 p.m. and started hiking back into the woods. They each had their own tree stands or blinds set up prior, so they made their way to them. I remember my grandpa telling me that they hiked a few miles back, so they had to have been deep in the woods. As the day goes on, they don't see any deer, so once the sun began to set, they decided to start making their way back to the truck and met up near my grandpa's tree stand. This is where the weird stuff happens. They're making their way back and the sun has completely set. Luckily, they brought flashlights for the walk back because otherwise they would have had to have walked a few miles in pitch black. Anyways, they finally have about a mile of hiking left when they see something or someone crouched in front of them with their back turned to them. My grandpa described him as a bald white guy wearing a black and white striped shirt. My grandpa's friend speaks up after a moment that I can only imagine as a "what the heck is this feeling?" and asks what he's doing out there, and without a word, the man stands up and faces them, stares, then levitates up toward the trees, and disappears. After that, they sprinted to the truck, and never went back to that land again. I know it's not the craziest of stories, and sounds so weird, but I know for a fact that my grandpa did experience this. My grandpa's not a liar, and it was never some scary campfire story that he told us grandkids. When he told me, I could see in his face that it was disturbing him, and is something that he can never forget. A good buddy of mine, Andy, and I went for a hike around our local quarry. We took a trail that we hadn't taken before. It had really awesome lookouts and a crazy graveyard that we walked by. It was super cool. We also hiked around to this other awesome spot with big rocks to climb. Then we decided to head back to the car. As we were walking back, Andy said that he felt like he had just walked through a giant spider web on the trail, but couldn't see or feel any strands to pull off. I said, "You just went through a portal," jokingly. He said, also half-jokingly, that he felt like he might have. Then he said that he started feeling a weird static electricity. This was strange because I was feeling the exact same thing. We were walking, and seriously, it felt strangely just intense with jolts of energy going through both of our bodies. Our plan was to take a break at this cool wooden deck down by the quarry water. It was about halfway back to the end of the trail. The plan was originally to chill there for a minute and listen to music on the water, but after that happened we were freaking out and wanting to see if we could feel that same electricity again, so we went back the way we came and actually took another way back to the trail. We didn't feel anything this time. We had walked just far enough to kind of dismiss what had happened, but then we got back to the same spot where it had happened before. As soon as we started walking up the trail, all of a sudden it was like everything got so quiet, and it felt like we had walked into a cloud of energy that was even stronger than before. There was even an audible buzzing sound in our ears. It seriously made both of us stop in our tracks and say, "It's happening again." But this time, it was not a very good feeling. Like, I've never had a feeling of, "do not go that way," that intense before. We turned right around and walked the heck out of there, spooked as hell. This happened a few years back, on my spring break, senior year of high school. I was hiking part of the Long Trail, which goes south from Glastonbury to Bennington, and it was the usual very cold nights, warm, muddy days Vermont usually has in spring, so pretty fun to hike in. I was going to take a day and rest my feet, go swimming in a pond and cool off, so I took a detour onto the Bald Mountain Trail. I got to my campsite around 5, and the sun was setting, so I set up my hammock and rain tarp and made a fire. I made some Mountain House beef stroganoff and decided to just lay down and watch the flames. I hadn't seen anyone since before noon, which is unusual because it's a pretty well-traveled section of the trail. I started to get really uneasy, and it definitely felt like someone was watching me from a distance. I ended up sitting with my back against a maple, facing the fire and holding my camp knife. A few hours later, 9-ish, I heard a really loud crash in the woods, like a plane falling out of the sky or a freight train right next to me. Then dead silence. No wind, no leaves, no owls, just absolute quiet. I remember getting really uncomfortable and shouting out to see if there was anyone out there, but I just started hearing a really subtle, droning noise, like a key being rubbed on a brass string or radio static but super low pitched. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just watched the moon go really slowly over the sky and the sound get quieter as it got lighter outside. When I could see well enough to walk, I picked up my gear and sprinted back to the main trail and found some people up early and hiked with them all the way back. About 4 years ago, I took my dog for a short hike. It was about a mile walk from the car to the beach along the Strait of Juan de Fuca in Washington state. The trail led us through the tall cedar trees, and then to a large clearing which led to the beach. My dog and I played on the beach for a while before I decided to head back. We stopped and took a break at a picnic table in the middle of the clearing. My dog, being the monkey she is, was standing on top of the picnic table looking around when she fixated on a spot across the field and her hair rose on the back of her neck. Always one to trust my pup, I became extra observant. As we stood there, a black mist appeared out of thin air to our right. I watched as it took on a long form roughly the size of a human. It glided across the trail and dissolved. It was really like looking at a small black translucent cloud. It scared the crap out of me and my dog, and I boogied back to the car. I've never found an answer to what the black mist was.